Brad, how significant is this and how dangerous could this development be for Amazon?
I mean, obviously, it's significant. An antitrust case by a prominent attorney general with more on the way and scrutiny from the FTC. It's not good. But as for the outcome, I think this is a long legal case and a complex issue. And let me just break it down quickly, Emily. I mean, I think in principle, it's not as bad as it sounds. In reality, it might be worse. And by that, I mean the charge against Amazon. Basically, a couple of years ago, Amazon gave up this idea of price parity, forcing sellers to give it the lowest price. But it still implements that in a very kind of subtle way in its search engine and on the buy box. A lot of retailers do this, but for third-party sellers, it's a kind of invisible tribunal. If they offer a price for sale lower somewhere else, if some of their merchandise gets in the wrong hands and it's offered for sale lower, Amazon will simply disappear them and there's no recourse. So I think ultimately the fact set looks bad for Amazon. That they probably fix it with a couple of adjustments to their business model.
The other big state and federal cases that have been filed against big tech company have focused on Google and Facebook, not Amazon. Michael, how concerned should investors be about this for Amazon in particular?
I mean, we're going to have to see what the facts actually tell us, but Brad said it right. Most favored nations clauses are really common. Medicare has one for drug prices, and you can't offer anything lower elsewhere than you offer to Medicare as a buyer. So Amazon is essentially following that practice. And if in fact it's draconian and they say, wait a minute, if somebody takes my vendor's product and then discounts it a third party unrelated to Amazon, that's overreaching, and that could be a problem. But I doubt that's going to happen. And I think Brad's right. It's a minor fix. I think this suit's going nowhere. The fact is that the antitrust laws were written literally 100 years ago and prior, and they just never contemplated anything like e-commerce. So unless Congress gets its act together and changes the law, I think Amazon skates. I think there is no risk whatsoever, and I don't think investors are going to be worried about it. And you can pretty much count on our Congress not getting together and agreeing on anything.
Interesting. Brad, I do want to mention what Amazon has said in response to this suit, saying the D.C. Attorney General has it exactly backwards. Sellers set their own prices for the products they offer in our store. Like any store, we reserve the right not to highlight offers to customers that are not priced competitively. So that speaks to both of your points. However, I guess I wonder in terms of what's happening in practice and how much that might differ from what's on paper. Brad.
Yeah, that's a good point, Emily. Amazon is saying here that sellers set their own price, but by virtue of this very soft, very opaque, most favorite nation or price parity clause, is Amazon in a de facto way requiring sellers to set an absolute minimum price and to perhaps raise their prices elsewhere. I mean, that's the argument here. It's a kind of tough one to back into. And I think, as Michael said, I mean, the original purpose of antitrust law was to lower price and maintain low prices for customers and not ensure that, not allow monopolists to raise prices artificially. And on its face, that's what Amazon's doing here. So it's kind of a backwards argument, and I think I tend to agree with Michael, and in this case, at least, on its face with Amazon's defense.
I'm just hearing that we are going to be speaking with the Washington, D.C. Attorney General Karl Racine at the bottom of the hour. So, Michael, I'm gonna tell him what you said, that you think this case is going nowhere and that Amazon skates away. I mean, what questions do you have for the Attorney General, if indeed that's what you believe?
Well, it's a problem of proof, and he's going to have to show damage. So he's going to have to actually get a vendor to come forward and say, yeah, I wanted to charge, $40 on Amazon and $30 elsewhere. And because of Amazon, I had to raise the price elsewhere. That's not what happened. They had to drop the price to 30 on Amazon. If you can find that retailer who said, no, that vendor who said I raised the price elsewhere because Amazon made me, maybe he's got a case. I doubt that smoking gun exists. I can't even imagine that exists.
Meantime, we are potentially hours away from Amazon's biggest acquisition since Whole Foods. We're all expecting that Amazon will be buying MGM Studios in a massive acquisition. Michael, if indeed this happens, do you think this is a good move for Amazon, given the backdrop of all of this scrutiny as well.
I do. I don't. There's certainly no antitrust issue with them owning a film library or a studio. They're just not big enough to make a meaningful difference. People can quibble over whether 17,000 hours of television content and 4,000 films is worth $9 billion or $4 billion or something less, but that's about a week's worth of revenue for Amazon. So who cares? I mean, it's just not a big deal. And considering it's going to be amortized over the next 20 years, Amazon is buying 90 years worth of content, and it's going to take them 90 years to build a library that big. And they have to compete with Peacock, which has the NBC Universal library, and Disney Plus, which has Disney and Fox's library, and HBO Max, which has Warner Brothers library. So they just can't compete with those services if they don't have a library of their own. And I actually think the loser here is Netflix, because they don't have a deep library, and Amazon just locked up some more content that wasn't locked up by the other big services.
Brad, what's your take on that? I mean, you chronicle in your book how Amazon Studios, their original programming especially, got off to a slow start. They didn't necessarily know how to negotiate in Hollywood. They had some executive problems at the company, and now we're seeing Bezos spending big here, though he has over the last several years been willing to spend there where he hasn't been willing to spend elsewhere. What do you make of this?
Well, it's interesting. In the beginning, there was only a kind of intuition on how they might monetize original content or licensed content. And what's really developed since then are some business models to go and exploit the kind of content library they're going to be getting from MGM. So it's not just making content the centerpiece of the Prime $119 a year subscription club, but it's also the growth of Amazon's ad business. And we've seen the growth of, say, IMDb TV, which people might not know a lot about, but it's really this free streaming service juggernaut that's growing very quickly. You put MGM's library in there, and very quickly you start to monetize it, as well as getting some of that franchise potential that Amazon has lacked with some of the competitors that Michael's talked about. So all sorts of spin-off potential in the Rocky franchise or the James Bond franchise, if Amazon can of course get the rights to that from the family that controls the Bond franchise. But that's in part what they're buying, just opportunity to creative opportunity based on some of the properties MGM has.